Democrats lost their base and their message. My hope would be that they recognize that the Democrats and Republicans have essentially become indistinguishable in the sense that both pre-Trump supported large government. They differed slightly on how they wanted to spend the money, but larger governments were good. And also supported corporatist policies. But let's hear what Nate Cohn attributes this loss to. It has long been clear that the rise of Donald J. Trump meant the end of the Republican Party as we once knew it. Indeed, the era of the Republicans as big business, 80s, Wall Street, that has been over for quite some time. But it is now over in real terms. It has belatedly become clear that his rise may have meant the end of the Democratic Party as we knew it as well. This is perhaps a bit myopic. I would say the Democratic Party, since probably the days of Bill Clinton, has not been the Democrat Party of yesteryear, the one that you're thinking of, the one that the classic liberals, I'm assuming Nate Cohn is old enough to remember your Jimmy Carter, your John F. Kennedy's, your Democratic Party when it was the small labor working class voters, when it represented people, and to be honest, in a lot of sort of the traditional pre-Tony Blair Labor Party days, was kind of socialist. And I'm not going to even say socialist in a bad way, but in the sense of, tax and spend, government programs are good, government is there to help provide for people, and it's there to rein in big business. Big business is bad, and it needs to be controlled, it needs to be regulated for the good of the workers and just society in general. That, with really the rise of Bill Clinton and then Tony Blair following his example, went away. Bill Clinton won, not entirely, but largely because he actually appealed to that big business. He said, look, big business is actually good. They are our friends, and we should support them. This is why he had that, overwhelming number of support. He had the traditional Democrat base, plus he had some Wall Street people that were backing him. So I would say the Democrat Party of yesteryear, the idealized version of it that many dyed-in-the-wool Democrat liberals have in their head, has been gone for quite a long time. After 3 Trump elections, almost every traditional Democratic constituency has swung to the right. In fact, I don't know if we should be even categorizing it as the right anymore. Again, this is, when you say to the right, what you mean is Republican. But I don't think these, Democrat people, these groups that were strongly Democrat, were moved to the right, socially or fiscally. I think that they've been swayed to the party, the Republican Party. Because if you look at the issues, black people, which they're going to mention right here, in terms of social values, are very conservative. They lean very conservative. They lean to the right on social issues. However, they vote Democrat, which you would say is on the left. So I think this left-right equals Democrat and Republican is perhaps missing a significant portion of what's going on. Let's continue. In fact, Mr. Trump has made larger gains among Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and young voters in his 3 campaigns since 2016 than he has among white voters without a college degree, according to New York Times estimates. In each case, Mr. Trump fared better than any Republican in decades. As you can see, the swing, these are all of the groups that shifted towards Republicans, and it is essentially every group except, I suppose, people over the age of 65, okay? And also white people with college degrees. And even there, I would like to see a further breakdown in terms of white men versus white women with college degrees. My guess is the share of, women getting college degrees is going up and up and up. And the share of men getting college degrees is proportionally lower, even if the absolute number is maybe the same. But the white women with degrees, my guess is swaying that number to still stay in the Democrats. I haven't looked at it, but my guess would be white men with college degrees probably did swing a little bit towards Republican. Even if it is still strongly Democrat, it probably has swung a little bit. I could be wrong, though. There are, of course, many explanations for Kamala Harris's defeat. President Biden was deeply unpopular and exited late. Depends on your definition of exited. She was an imperfect candidate, and ruling parties around the world have struggled to overcome a post-pandemic and post-inflation hangover. These are all true. It's kind of dubious whether or not these issues were actually, acknowledged before her defeat. The polls offer support for all of these hypotheses, and given the closeness of the election, it's entirely possible that Democrats could have won under slightly different circumstances. The closeness of the election, every single competitive swing state went for Donald Trump. I'm sure if you like politics, you've seen the charts, you've seen the maps. Every county, except for a couple, went more Republican than they have in the past, than they did in 2020. This was not, the closeness of the election. No. Personally, I would certainly have said Biden probably actually would have been a better candidate, and he probably would have done better, but he would have lost. There's no doubt about it. I don't think there is a single candidate the Democrats could have put up that would have beat Trump. The margins might have been a little bit slimmer, but he would have, whoever that candidate would have been, would have lost. There probably wasn't a realistic case of young and non-white voters supporting Ms. Harris at a level the Democrats would have taken for granted just a few years ago. And while the election was still close, this erosion of strength among the party's core groups has been happening for a long time. Alright, so here are the groups that shifted Democrat. White, in general, +1. That's, 41 to 57, 42 to 57. That's within the margin of error. A +1, ±1. Statistically, you don't actually know if they shifted towards Democrats or not. Clearly, if you were to say white, let me see. most certainly did. Race and education, white with a bachelor's degree plus did go plus 17. Again, I would like to see the breakdown. White, bachelor's plus between men and women. I would like to see the breakdown there. And then 65 and older went plus 4 Democrat. That's a little bit stronger of an indication, but it's still not a huge swing. As opposed to, look at these, all of these are almost double digit. Well outside of the margin of error. This is a clear pattern. Plus 4, plus 1. Plus 4 is fairly strong. Plus 1 is not. Plus 1 is, who knows, toss up. This might be Democrats. It might be Republicans. It might be a dead heat. No swing whatsoever. We have no clue. Yeah, but the white with bachelors. And again, you really should be looking deeper into this. That's a strong indicator. In each campaign, win or lose, Mr. Trump made major inroads among longtime Democratic voters. First, it was the northern white working class. Then it was Hispanic and Asian voters in 2020. Finally, it was young voters and, to a lesser extent, black voters. I mean, plus 19. Plus 19. That's fairly significant inroads. Let's be honest here. In each case, Mr. Trump's gains went far beyond what Democrats had ever imagined. Yeah, absolutely true. Now, maybe that's because their polling was bad, and therefore their imaginations were not really backed up by the data. It could also be that, the Democrats take some of these groups for granted. Because look, when you're getting 95% of black people, I'm sorry, but I'm taking that for granted. Absolutely. That's in the bag. We got the black vote. We got the black vote in the bag. And I mean, you still got what? 85%? Still got 85% in 2024. But it's a big loss. Even at the times Mr. Trump made relatively few gains, say among Hispanic voters in 2016 or black voters in 2020, Democrats nonetheless underperformed. In 2016, despite a campaign dominated by Mr. Trump's inflammatory comments about immigrants and Mexicans, Hillary Clinton failed to improve over Barack Obama's performance among Hispanic voters. Democrats then lost ground among them in 2018. Similarly, Democratic support among black voters fell in 2020, and the black share of the electorate declined as well, despite the outpouring of activism in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Black turnout then slipped yet again in 2022. Okay, this is an interesting mention here. The black share of the electorate declined as well. Now, that is not to say that less black people voted. I believe that is the case. I mean, obviously, less people voted in 2024 than 2020. The total vote counts are way less because of, we didn't have universal mail-in ballots and these types of things. But the share of the electorate could actually be that, the black population, in terms of raw numbers, is not expanding as quickly as, say, the Hispanic population is. Which, yeah, I think that is true. And therefore, a swing for Hispanics plus 29 in Republican terms is going to just completely blow out any, even if you kept the black vote, 95%, if your raw numbers of Hispanic people in the U.S. voting numbers go up, yeah, a shift to the Republicans is going to, it's just a blowout. They just have a larger share of the electorate. The overarching pattern is clear. In election after election, Democrats underperformed among traditional Democratic constituencies during the Trump era. Sometimes it was merely a failure to capitalize on his unpopularity. I think you're missing something there. A failure to capitalize on unpopularity presupposes that he is actually unpopular amongst these groups. And certainly he is unpopular amongst a large portion of those people, but I don't think you failed to capitalize on it. I just think you misunderstood his level of unpopularity in these places. They have the Don Lemon stuff. They've got plenty of people go out and do street interviews in black, traditionally Democrat neighborhoods and areas, and they go, how do you think you feel about Trump? Do you like him? Do you hate him? A lot of people, and maybe it's just because it's the most, salacious interviews, but they'll say, we like him. He's good. He's all right. I had more money in my pocket. I had, things were easier. X, Y, Z. So my guess is it's not that you failed to capitalize on it. You were, you didn't go for the jugular on his unpopularity. You let that be a very nebulous thing. No, you went hard on his unpopularity. It's just that he wasn't that unpopular amongst these groups. At least not enough to override their, individual, voting with their pocketbook. Voting their value, X, Y, Z, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you didn't fail to capitalize it. His unpopularity was just not as big of an issue. Other times it was a staggering decline in support. Together it has shattered Democratic dreams of building a new majority with the rise of a new generation of young and non-white voters. Yeah, very true. Now, why is that? As I've said, I would say it's because the Democrats essentially have turned into, the neoliberal, neocon party, and the Republicans still have neocons in there, but they are poised to be the new party, new populist working class, middle class party that represents them and their new values. The Democrats are, they're getting their money from big business. And unless they shift back to, something else, which I don't think they will. Yeah, the new generation Democrat Party is going to be representing very different values than the 60s Democrats. This overarching pattern requires an overarching explanation. Mr. Trump's populist conservatism corroded the foundations of the Democratic Party's appeal. It tapped into many of the issues and themes that once made these voters Democrats. Corroded the foundations of the Democratic Party's appeal. I don't know. I think this is a situation where you have to say, look, this is not the barbarians knock down your walls. It's that people inside betrayed your nation. They betrayed the values that they had, and they let people in. They opened the gates. The fortresses do not fall from sieges. They fall from internal pressures. And I would say that is what has happened with the Democratic Party. The damage was mostly concealed by Mr. Trump's unpopularity. Again, that might be say the people in charge were focused on his unpopularity. But the unpopularity was, again, just clearly not as strong as they thought it was. While the damage was mostly concealed by Mr. Trump's unpopularity, the backlash to his norm-shattering presidency drew the Democratic Party even further from its traditional roots. The extent of that damage is now clear. Agreed. Agreed. The populist message. For a century, Democrats had been seen as the party of the people, the party against powerful interests and for change. I would argue the last 20, 30 years that's not really been true, but I can understand that still being the perception. Again, I would say Bill Clinton really kind of moved that away, but, you know. When Mr. Obama pursued the presidency, he staked his campaigns on these themes. Okay, in 2008, he ran against Washington and promised to take on lobbyists and special interests, a top concern of voters. In 2012, he won by attacking Mitt Romney as a corporate plutocrat who would outsource jobs and help the wealthy, not the middle class. He said Americans needed to focus on nation building here at home. That sounds very much like a America First policy. And it seems like, look, he didn't achieve that. Which is why, Donald Trump could say, make America great again, and get support on it. If the nation building here at home had worked, you wouldn't need another party to do it. These arguments have been central to Democratic campaigns for decades, evident in a half-century of Democratic slogans. Middle class first, change we can believe in, putting people first, on your side, a leader for a change. They're the arguments that brought millions of working class voters to the Democrats. Indeed, it was what the Democratic Party meant. Right here, you're getting into the divide between optics and policy. I agree, the Democrats, optically, the appearance is that they have been for, we'll call it a century, the working class party. The policies have not really been that for probably a little while. But the nostalgia of this is the Democrat Party of Kennedy, of Carter, still has a massive amount of appeal, which is why you have these slogans. The optics do not line up with the policy. There are some policy things that you could say, yeah, hey, look, this did line up. But you also had a lot of, big business interests coming in, becoming very large, getting a lot of the handouts from Democrat administrations. Trump flipped all of it around. His populist pitch deprived Democrats of their traditional role in American politics, gradually weakening their bonds with working class voters as well as non-white and young ones. Look, if the Democrats were doing a great job at acting on their slogans and making them a reality, his message would not have resonated and no one would have changed sides. I think that's obvious. He ran against the establishment and promised to drain the swamp. He said he would take on a rigged system and said a global elite privileged its values and interests over ordinary Americans. He pledged to put America first and protect American jobs. This year's Republican platform was dedicated to the forgotten men and women of America, something you would see in speeches from Franklin D. Roosevelt, not George W. Bush or Mitt Romney. Okay. Mr. Trump's co-opting of these longtime Democratic themes was effective in three ways. First, he He adopted populist positions on entitlements, foreign policy, immigration, infrastructure, trade, and more. On many of these issues, Mr. Trump came closer to the views of organized labor or Bernie Sanders than Mr. Romney, views that millions of working-class Democrats agreed with. Without these positions, he would have been vulnerable to the attacks that Democrats leveled against Republicans in the past. So Trump is becoming more Democrat, and that's a problem. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I do agree with this. He absolutely is much more of a centrist than people would like, to portray him as, but he really is and has been. He was a Democrat first, he became a Republican later, but again, he still has a lot of these, centrist, liberal, leftist, Democrat tendencies. Second, Democrats were deeply vulnerable to Mr. Trump's anti-establishment critique. Over the prior 2 decades, Democrats took centrist and business-friendly positions on key issues. Mrs. Clinton, for instance, supported NAFTA, which was enacted by her husband and was initially a supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. She supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq. These issues divided the Democratic Party during the 2016 primary. They also made it possible for Mr. Trump to argue that Democrats were the party of elites and a rigged system. Was he wrong? Was he wrong to argue that? Clearly he was right to argue it because it won. It won him the election. And was he wrong in the facts that the Democrats were not the party of elites and a rigged system? Third, Democrats were burdened by power. Even as early as 2016, disillusionment was growing. Mr. Obama enacted much of his agenda, but after 8 years he wasn't seen as having delivered full employment or change to business as usual in Washington. I don't think he did. The rise of a new left and the strength of the Sanders campaign was one obvious expression of that disillusionment. Agreed. For less progressive Democrats, the same dissatisfaction manifested in declining turnout and ultimately an openness to Mr. Trump, a path followed by some Sanders supporters as well. Indeed, a lot of Bernie people were like, look, I like Bernie, who's, like an out-and-out Democratic socialist. If they're like, my second option is Trump, that really goes to show it's not so much, a right versus left deal. It's an establishment versus anti-establishment populist issue. In 2016, this added up to an enormous breakthrough for Mr. Trump among white voters without a college degree. The success of the Sanders campaign suggested there was opportunity for more, but Mr. Trump's deep personal unpopularity and his penchant to offend young voters, women, and black and Hispanic voters prevented an even larger breakthrough in 2016. Again, you've said unpopularity many times here. I don't know if it's as deep as you think it is. It doesn't seem to be as deep as you think it is. Even as Mr. Trump co-opted much of the traditional Democratic message, he offered Democrats an alternative path to victory, opposition to Mr. Trump himself. I guess. But apparently it was not a path to victory because, it lost. Stronger together, restore the soul of the nation. We're not going back. All tell the tale. These slogans weren't about the middle class, change, or the future. They were just different ways of expressing opposition to Mr. Trump. Who could possibly have predicted that a personal attack on the opposition candidate wouldn't resonate with enough voters to sway the election? election. Was this a mistake? Not necessarily. No. Of course not. No. Mr. Trump was deeply unpopular. I just promise. I know he's unpopular. I know it. He was seen as a threat to American society and democracy, and millions of white, college-educated, traditionally Republican voters were newly available to the party. While Democrats might have been better off with a populist campaign, it's not clear they could have pulled it off against Mr. Trump, given his distinct views on the issues and their own vulnerabilities on them. Anti-Trump messaging may have been the best card Democrats had to play. If that's true, then that was the only card you had to play, and that's not enough. The other side of this is they probably would have been better off with a populist campaign. The fact that they didn't do it seems to suggest that they didn't want to do it. Even if they could win with it, they didn't want to do it. I mean, this is the Bernie versus Hillary debate. Could Bernie have beaten Trump? I don't know. Because again, Democrats had been in power. They were unpopular. It was kind of, time for a switchover. It's likely that whoever was the Republican candidate would have won in 2016 regardless. But I think Bernie would have definitely put up more of a fight because he would have represented absolutely a populist anti-establishment view, and you would have had two candidates who were both expressing that, and, there would have been a shift either way. So the fact that the Democrats didn't go with that, they used, the rules and regulations, to sort of sneak in Hillary Clinton as the nominee as opposed to Bernie. I've got to imagine that they simply don't want to go with a populist campaign. They don't want populist policies. Maybe for some nefarious reason, maybe not. Maybe they just think, they're not good policies. They're not going to do the best thing for the country. But people want, at this point, a populist push. The fact that they didn't do it, even knowing that they probably could have won with it, means that they're probably against it. While the backlash against Mr. Trump breathed new life into Democrats, maybe, in other respects, it pulled the party further from its moorings. Agreed. Many Democrats saw Mr. Trump as racist and sexist, or as proof that America was a racist and sexist country. It inspired a new wave of progressive activism on race and gender, from Me Too to abolish ICE, that often drew heavily from the language of academia. It nudged the party even further from economic populism and its working class roots. You're kind of on the mark here, I gotta be honest. I don't know if you think that's a bad thing, but yeah, I would agree with everything in here so far. But again, other than maybe the many Democrats, I don't know if many Democrats see it as that. I think everyone sees racism and sexism as pretty, really bad things. And if they really believe that this person is racist and sexist, my guess is they're not going to vote for him. So, again, my guess would be that far fewer people believe it as strongly as you would like to suggest. As Mr. Trump broke norms, disregarded public health officials, and threatened a post-war foreign policy consensus. The two parties even found their usual roles reversed. Democrats became the party of institutions, the national security apparatus, norms, and ultimately the status quo, not change. Yes. This transformation culminated during the pandemic, when Mr. Trump's response to the coronavirus and the protests after George Floyd's murder alarmed and outraged Democrats. The party already saw itself as the defender of civil rights and science, but Mr. Trump galvanized an even more vigilant and righteous reaction. Maybe self-righteous. Activists, academics, and experts often opposed to Mr. Trump pushed a sweeping response from school shutdowns and mass mandates to diversity statements in hiring. For a time, none of this obviously hurt the Democrats. Joe Biden, after all, won the 2020 election. But once Mr. Trump left office and the pandemic continued, this brand of activist politics became a political liability. Very clearly, yes. As the pandemic wore on, public support for coronavirus restrictions gave way to a backlash against prolonged school closures, mask and vaccine mandates, and the public health experts who insisted on the measures. It eroded trust in government officials, elites, and the media. I kind of think it should have, right? The social upheaval during and after the pandemic caught Democrats flat-footed. The party's activist base had been enthralled by calls for a more compassionate immigration and criminal justice system, when suddenly the pandemic and its aftermath brought a spike in crime, rising homelessness, and a new wave of border crossings. I don't know if that's the pandemic and its aftermath. Was the pandemic and its aftermath responsible for the new wave of border crossings, or was that the Biden-Harris administration's policies on immigration? I think it's much more that than the pandemic. In just a year or two, liberals and progressives were seen as, by many, as discredited. Yeah. Again, should they not have been? I don't think this guy's arguing that, but with hindsight, this conservative reaction dealt a lasting blow to Democratic standing even before the 2024 election cycle began. Many of the most surprising swings in the election were foreshadowed in the 2022 midterms, when states like Florida and New York surged to the right. Yeah, I remember when Florida was a swing state. It's deep red now. In fact, the 2024 results were more closely correlated with the 2022 midterm results for U.S. House than the 2020 presidential election. This pattern has no modern precedent, and it suggests that the backlash against Democrats during 2021 and 2022 affected the political allegiance of millions of voters and ultimately the electoral map. A new cast of characters in Mr. Trump's orbit, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, and Joe Rogan, also seemed to turn toward the right during this period. In their eyes, they didn't change. The Democrats did. They were hardly alone. I gotta say, you do seem to have the right of it here, but again, they turned toward the right. No, they did not turn towards the right. They turned towards the Republicans, because the Republican Party moved, the Democrat Party moved, and all of a sudden, the Republican Party overlaps more with their values than the Democrat Party. So you would move to the party that better represents the things that you find important. I gotta be honest, yeah, they didn't move towards the right. They didn't change their political stance on issues. The parties that represented, the party's policies, they shifted. People are not becoming more conservative. The Republican Party is becoming more centrist. And the Democrat Party is becoming more leftist. And I don't even know if I want to say leftist. More neoliberal, maybe. Anyway, yeah, you know what? I like this article. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the points in here are absolutely spot on. The one issue that I will have with it is the unpopularity of Trump. This was, again, the main attack vector for all of the Democrat, campaign pushes, was that Donald Trump is super unpopular. That's what we're doubling down on. That we're tripling down on it. That's our only thing that we care about. It seems that he wasn't that unpopular. If he was actually as deeply unpopular as he was, those attacks would have landed. They whiffed. They did not deliver the punch you were expecting, because I would imagine you overestimated his unpopularity and underestimated people's ability to overlook their dislike of a figure if that figure's policies seem like they will do them better in the long run. Well, good luck in all your endeavors. Thank you for your time and attention. I shall say farewell for now.